Alright, so today I am working on a whole bunch of bison skinner blades, coral and obsidian and shirt. Basically a whole bunch of them. I've got, I think, maybe 10 or so bison skinners. If you know, woo, almost dropped that. If you're not familiar with the bison skinner that we do, that was like the original bison skinner. Got the natural wood handle, little starburst thing. So Christmas time and all, this being what, December 1st, and you're probably going to watch this tomorrow, most likely. Knives are a big seller during Christmas time, so I'm playing catch up a little bit. Usually I'm really far ahead, so then after I get done with the bison skinners, I'm going to be working on some knives for more antler handled, or some blades for more antler handled knives as well. So I kind of run everything in batches and kind of like an assembly line. So you get a bunch of biface stuff, and then what I'll do is I'll sit down and I'll do take all the preforms, and then I'll finish them into the blades that I want. When all those are done, then I'll go ahead and do all the handles of one kind. And so I figured today was a great day to do our story and a nap. And we might get into a story, but it's probably going to be a little bit more along the lines of a couple technical things that I posted about on social media over the weekend. And of course, you can't post anything without kind of stirring up a little drama. Luckily, most of our followers, especially our core followers, they're some pretty decent people and they don't argue too much, but the algorithm shares it out to other folks that aren't used to what we're up to, and everybody's got an opinion, and so I thought it was kind of a fun thing to be able to talk about a little bit more, because it does seem to get the imagination going and folks thinking a little bit differently when they consider primitive hunting versus more modern methods of hunting. And then of course I'll stop and show you some stuff occasionally as well, like hopefully you guys can see those there, the polyps in this coral blade. There's a whole bunch of fossilized polyps in there. So that coral head obviously had been buried quickly and turned into a fossil, and all of those polyps, that's those individual little organisms that live inside the coral. And if you cut the coral in the way that not cut the coral, none of this is cut, but if you do cut it, you can see it on slabs. But even if you biface it, and it just happens to break in the way that the coral polyps are growing, which in this case they would be growing out like this. They just get longer and longer like a tube, and then as you nap across them, that's just like a cross section of those little polyps. So that's kind of neat to be able to see that stuff. And of course, might as well say it like I always do. If you're just happened to be landing on my page for the very first time and you're interested in Flintknapping, we have the Flintknapping for Beginners video where we explain everything that you guys see me do, and that's created a tremendous amount of good nappers. So I've got really 2 videos available for you now. Well, I got a lot more than 2, but 2 that I recommend for beginners, and that will explain things a lot better than I am today. But we're going to go into the other stuff that I was going to talk to you about today. And I posted on social media that I would rather shoot, and now before you get all wound up at me and drop down in the comments and tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, hear me out the whole way, and it might make you think a little bit differently about it. But I would rather shoot a 400 grain arrow than a 600 grain arrow. And that is contrary to about everything that folks know and believe to be true when it comes to, say, traditional archery and penetration and all that kind of stuff. And so I also wrote about that. If you're new to it, I wrote about it in my, this is the first volume. I guess we got three Secrets in Science books to date right now. The Secrets in Science of Primitive Archery, Secrets in Science of the Atlatl, Secrets in Science of Building Bows and Arrows. And this one right here we talk about the differences between primitive archery and traditional archery and how that affects, like the Dr. Ed Ashby reports. So that's a good sized book right there that you can learn a heck of a lot from. If you don't have it, I highly recommend it. But we're going to be talking about some stuff that's in that book. And so I am not arguing in the least that more mass and momentum and kinetic energy penetrates better. I'm not arguing that. But what I am saying is, in now, to date, the 81 animals that I've killed with primitive hunting implements, sticks and rocks, a couple trade points mixed in, but for the most part, all sticks and rocks. And what I've learned in that is that I would rather shoot a 400 grain arrow. In fact, I'll even take it to the extreme and say I would rather shoot a 350 grain arrow, possibly even a 300, honestly, but that's a little excessive, not just because it's light, but it's almost hard to build one that light at this point. But I would rather shoot a 350 grain arrow than I would a 600 grain arrow. And the reason is because then the arrow is really slow moving. And I've talked about this in many other times as well, but if we're talking about shooting at a whitetail, there it is. If we're talking about shooting at a whitetail, it's pretty flighty. You know, they're a little spookier than some of your bigger animals, like bison and whatnot. A faster arrow counts for quite a bit. Now, I would say that having a quiet bow is actually more important than having a fast arrow. And with modern bowstrings and stuff like that, you know, like a fast flight string is inherently noisier than a B50 string. And then if you consider something like a natural sinew string, they're even quieter yet. You don't even put fur silencers on them, and they're pretty darn quiet. And so what I have found is shooting a natural bowstring, natural sinew bowstring, is my bow's pretty darn quiet, and deer don't usually react as much, but they will react some. Well, also keep in mind that when you have a natural materials bowstring, you don't have the higher performance, the higher arrow speed of a modern bowstring either. So you're inherently shooting a slower speed and less energy, for that matter, with a true primitive bowstring. And so some might say, well, if you're shooting less energy and, you know, less power in general, you'd want that heavier arrow because you would need it for penetration. And to that is where, with all the studies that we conducted within the book that I just showed you, I actually found that not to be the case. We don't really have any trouble with penetration. If we can keep our arrow speed, you know, up to about 150 feet per second, and a little bit less. 150 is kind of a good sweet spot, not just for penetration, but because of the speed that the arrow gets there. Let me flip through some of this real quick so you guys can see. But we've got pages, if you guys haven't seen it, I mean pages of hogs and deer that have details about where they hit, how far it penetrated, the size of the stone point, the weight of the arrow, the approximate speed that bow shoots with a certain arrow. I mean, this whole form's filled out for each one. And Vastin shot a lot of hogs. I got a bunch in here too. Just a tremendous amount of data to share, and that's why I'm very confident in all the things that we write in this book regarding penetration and arrow speed and natural material strings and everything. There's just a lot that goes into it, and obviously we've killed a lot more animals than this, but that's enough for the book to prove the point. So let me think on that here a second, get back to where I was. So why is it that I would then prefer to have a lighter arrow? And that's because if the deer hears the shot go off, which they pretty much always can, unless you get kind of lucky and it's a little windy or something like that. But for the most part, the deer are going to hear the shot go off. And yes, you can't outrace a deer's reaction time. So you're not going to beat them. But many times I have taken my videos and I've slowed them way down, as slow as I can get them. You know, shooting 60 frames per second. And I've had instances where you can see the arrow going, when I was especially shooting a really slow hickory bow at one point. Was trying to do this big hickory study and just wanted to see what I could kind of get away with. I was having deer completely get out of the way of the arrow, and the arrow was pretty darn quiet. But it was just such a slow setup. The whole thing was slow. And you could see that the arrow was traveling, and the deer was completely gone before the arrow ever got there. And then even shooting some faster bows, I've got opportunities where deer heard or saw me shoot or something, and you could slow it down to a single frame rate. Could be the difference between the arrow hitting the vitals versus, say, the deer continuing to duck and it hitting it in the backstrap, or, you know, starting to turn. And I've even had hogs do that. I've got videos of hogs that are reacting to the shot, and if the arrow doesn't get there in time, in a game of inches, you know, that animal could be moved in that millisecond of time that it takes that animal to continue its movement. Your arrow may not hit where you want it to hit or in a vital spot. And so shooting a lighter arrow that's faster tends to get the arrow there a bit quicker. And so, of course, then the other argument is, yeah, but that's fine if everything's perfect, and, you know, if you have you know, a perfect broadside shot and you don't hit any sort of substantial bone, because if you would hit bone, the light arrow is not going to go through. Sure, if you want to shoot a really heavy arrow off of a modern type of bow, and that one's done there, you want to shoot a, you know, more modern type bow and a heavier arrow, shooting a modern string that's faster, you're still probably going to shoot a fast enough speed that you're not really too affected by the movement of the deer. So let's just say you're shooting a fiberglass recurve, or maybe a higher performance self bow that's got a D97 string on it, something like that. Then absolutely you're probably going to be shooting in the 170s or 180s, maybe 160s somewhere, and with a 550, 600 grain arrow, and, you know, a heavy FOC 2-blade broadhead, that sort of deal. And maybe if you hit the shoulder bones or something like that, you're going to penetrate through it enough that you're going to kill the animal. That's the argument, and I got that. And they're like, well, you know, I want to have the safe margin of error when I'm hunting, so I would rather shoot the really heavy arrow. So I got that argument. But the thing that I don't think many think about when it comes to hunting with genuine stone points is, if you hit that robust shoulder bone area with a stone point, I don't care if you've got a 1,000 grain arrow, that stone point's not going through. Not reliably. I'm not saying one will never find its way through or whatever. But what I'm saying is, your stone point and your haft are the weak links in the system. So it doesn't matter how heavy of an arrow you shoot. If, say, you hit a big bull bison rib or a water buffalo rib, which we did. You know, I went out and shot a water buffalo to see what we could get away with and all kinds of stuff. I don't care how heavy that arrow is. You can throw an atlatl and hit a big, robust bone, and you're not going to penetrate it, because the stone point is going to break or crush or deflect, and the haft is going to fail, and the point is going to get shoved back into the shaft, and it's going to rob all the energy from your projectile. So if you're banking on trying to break through shoulder bones with stone points, you're playing the wrong game. And I know that there's some videos out there too on YouTube where, you know, you could stack up a whole bunch of deer shoulder blades and shoot through them. That's dry, seasoned bone, or even if it's wet bone, whatever, you're not considering that you have to shoot through hide and hair. And if you want to take a carcass or take bones and shoot through them and you think that you're going to put stone points through it, then I say go for it. And then when you shoot a deer in real life and realize that it ain't going through, you're going to know what I'm talking about. And then that's a point that I'll say, see, nobody ever listens to Uncle Ryan. And that's because I've been there and I've seen it many times over. So if you're banking on making a bad shot and hitting a deer in the shoulder blade and hoping to punch through it with a stone point, all I'm going to say is good luck. But you're going to find out. You're going to find out. So if we can't go through the shoulder blade anyway, then what do we need the extra weight for? I don't need the extra weight for anything. So what I'd rather have is the arrow speed. And then the arrow speed, get that arrow there a little bit faster. I'm not going to take any shots that, you know, a quartering to shot is not something I'm overly interested in taking. I don't really take those shots to begin with. I'm pretty content to put myself in a situation where, you know, I'm going to take a good shot anyway. And do accidents happen? Sure. But if we can't get through the shoulder blade or any robust bone anyway, then what do I want the heavy arrow for? I don't. I want a light arrow so it gets there faster. And I've never had, in all the years that I'm doing this, I've never had a time when a properly built stone pointing arrow being shot off of a bow that say shoots 150 feet per second, something like that, I have never once hit a rib from a deer or a hog and failed to penetrate it. That's never happened. I've always busted through. There's multiple times that I've broken 2 ribs because the point lands horizontally as it goes in, and it cuts through 2 ribs and breaks them, and will continue into the vitals and kill the animal, no problem. I have never, ever once shot an animal with a lighter arrow, not gotten it, and then said, you know, if I was shooting a heavier arrow, I probably would have killed it. It's never happened. In fact, you know, in the book and in the video, I talk about that with the bison, the bow bison kill that we did. That I know my buddy Joe McConnell, who was coming to help out, thought I was nuts that I didn't have a single arrow, even 500 grains. I think my heaviest arrow was like 480 grains or 492 grains or something like that, close to it. I didn't have a single arrow that was even 500 grains. That one's done. That looks nice. And in fact, the arrow that penetrated the bison the best was my lightest arrow that I shot, which was 412 grains. So, you know, what I've really found is that the friction is a bigger contributor to penetration, or say the decreasing of friction is a bigger contributor to penetration than the mass is. And so that's what we've really found is, like I said, if you can decrease the friction, shooting a smaller point, shooting a tapered shaft, a thinner shaft, anything you can do to decrease friction, that's going to actually benefit penetration more than mass will be, especially when it comes, then more than mass will, especially when you're talking about sticks and rocks. And so in all the animals now that I've shot, like I said, even shooting through hogs' shields and stuff like that, your best chance is not with more weight and a bigger point, because that's more friction. Again, talking about stone points here. your best bet is to shoot a really tiny stone point and a very thin arrow shaft so you have less friction, and that is what's going to penetrate better. Oh yeah. I was thinking that maybe it was a little forward, dude. You cranked that one through the shield. It's got a little shield on it and everything. That is a nice shot. Just where I was aiming. Oh, the point's still in it. Okay. Good to know. Should be able to get that one back. That's awesome, man. So, of course, you know, when you post all this kind of stuff and say, I'd rather shoot a light arrow, you know, you've got a lot of people out there that they want to argue against it. And it's like, it's all dependent on the situation. So are there instances where a heavy arrow would be beneficial? And I would say, yeah, I would say that if I was specifically going out to shoot bison and wanted to be the most effective with it, I would probably want to shoot a heavier arrow so long as I wasn't shooting something that was so thick or so clunky that it robbed me of, you know, a streamlined, less friction sort of a projectile. You know, if I've got to make it super heavy and therefore make the shaft a lot thicker, well, now I'm not so interested in that. And we did those tests all in the book too. There's a lot of in real-time tests that with data we collected to show that I would rather shoot a thinner, lighter arrow than I would a heavier one when it comes to stone points. You know, not just because of the speed, but because of the friction aspect of it. So it all comes down to that particular reasoning, but if we try to use, you know, the same process and justifications in traditional archery that we do in primitive, that's where a lot of people are like, well, you know, I didn't get the deer, I didn't penetrate very well, and they're like, well, I was shooting a 600 grain arrow, you know, and it's like, yeah, but it was really thick and really clunky, and the deer was able to move, and you ended up hitting it in the shoulder blade, and if it wouldn't have ducked so hard or wouldn't have whirled in time or whatever, you may have gotten that animal. And so that's why I just wanted to share that with you guys, that out of all the experience I have, there's a specific reason that I would rather shoot a 400 grain arrow than a really heavy arrow. And I'm sure still, even in this conversation, somebody's listening to it. Whether they listen to the whole thing or not, they're going to respond back and tell me all the reasons I'm wrong. And that's the great thing about having the ability to build your own stuff or buy products, you know, that fit whatever it is that you're trying to do. If you would still rather shoot a 600 grain arrow and shoot a slower speed with it, then you can absolutely go do that. But I'm just telling you from all the experience I have, what I personally hunt with and why I do it. And you know, sometimes we have to learn those things ourselves also. It's like I have nothing to gain by saying, hey, I'd rather shoot a light arrow. You know, I'm just telling you what works. If I thought a 700 grain arrow was going to work better for me, well, by God, I'd shoot that. You know, I'm just here to be as efficient as possible and get the animal. And I tell you what, my success rate in kills has actually gone up since shooting the lighter arrows. Check that out. Guys, I killed 2 hogs last night and just cracked this nice one just now. And I have not had an issue thus far with penetration. Look at my arrow. Look at my arrow, son. Are you kidding me? Look at that arrow. It is covered in blood. That was a complete pass-through wherever it hit her, and there's blood everywhere on that arrow. Are you kidding me? And look at that.
Perfect shot. Alright, give me the camera.
Shot and stop.
Drag her out here, because this is the mosquito.
They're getting you,
right
huh?
here. Dude,
they're all over you. Like I said, I haven't had one single one that I'm like, you know what, if I would have had a heavier arrow, I probably would have got it. But I have had multiple opportunities where I've watched it back on film and thought, oh, one or two frames of film is the difference between a perfect hit and either a miss or a high hit. And I have thought, if I only would have been shooting a faster arrow, be it a faster bow, faster arrow, faster string, whatever, I would have got that animal. And since I want to shoot purely primitive, a real wood bow, and my short draw length, because that's what I'm most comfortable shooting, and a genuine sinew string, then the only way that I'm going to speed this system up is to shoot a lighter arrow. And so that's what I've done, and it's worked out perfectly for me. So do with that information what you want. Alright, that should probably do it for us today. Now I still have a few more of these to knap. Maybe I'll even record another one for another day, but that's probably enough for one day. Something to think on a little bit. And I'm going to get back to doing some of these, and then I got just a couple more to go, and then I'll start the process of putting handles on these. But anyway, thanks for joining us today. Go ahead and drop, down in the comments and let me know what you think about that subject. I said if you don't agree with it, that's perfectly fine. You can do whatever it is you want to do. I'm just trying to help folks out. And also keep in mind, especially the time of year, whatnot, you can get the books. Books are a big help if you're really into this kind of stuff, or you know somebody that loves, primitive archery and primitive hunting, or the atlatl. The Secrets and Science book collection is a great gift idea. Kind of shamelessly plugging my Christmas sale stuff, and then the knives that we're working on. And I got some other types of knives and stuff out there too, but that's just what we're working on today. So anyway, I'll let you go for this one. I'll get back to work, and we'll catch you on the next one.